Testing, testing. Oh, we got it? Okay, perfect. I guess it's recording. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today to our fourth quarterly workshop for the Water More Precious Than Gold program. This is going to be on Irrigation 101. My name is Ethan Brown. I am the Water Conservation Specialist for Arizona Water Company. Many of you have probably met Raluca back there on the corner. She is the Water Conservation Coordinator. So she really helped put this on, and then today we have Jeff Lee from the town of Gilbert as our speaker, but I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more. But without further ado, we'll get started. Actually, real quick before, I should remind you that if you did not sign up or for our walk-in sheet or our already registered sheet, please do so. We'll also have a post-survey at the end, where if you complete that and hand it back to me, you will get entered into our raffle for not one, but 3 plants. Plants change, so we got more plants available. So we'll have 3 lucky winners for our plants. Also, we are giving away our free water conservation kits. So if you're interested in those, I'll vet through everyone, make sure everyone's eligible for the program, and then just come to me at the end, and I will hand out those kits to you all. So if you have any questions about that, just save those for the end, or come visit me in the corner and we can talk a little bit about that. All right, I'll hand it off to Jeff.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for spending the morning with us. As Ethan said, my name is Jeff Lee. I'm a water conservation specialist for the town of Gilbert. I've been in the irrigation industry for about 35 years now, both in water conservation and in the real world as a contractor, actually designing and installing and managing these irrigation systems. So when Raluca came to me and suggested and saw if I was interested in presenting out here, I was trying to get a feel for what would be the best topic for you, and she said, well, just real high-level irrigation so they kind of get an idea of what it is and kind of what to do with it. So I said, okay, we can set up a shortened version of one of the classes I already do, which is on maintenance and repair. So we've got a class set up this morning for where we talk about how to maintain your drip irrigation systems and how to fix them, and your sprinkler systems for your lawns and how to fix them. However, I started looking at the aerial photos of your communities last night, and I realized pretty much none of you have any grass.
Yay for us.
Does anyone here have any grass with sprinklers? One person does, okay. As I was going to say, if we don't have to talk about sprinklers, what I can do is then segue into a short class on how to properly water. So it's up to you guys which way we want to do. Now Raluca said kind of the way she'd set it up is I do a little bit of speaking, and then open it up for questions, and then finish off the class. But really what I like to do is I don't want you to forget your questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand when you have it. Now, if it's something we're already going to talk about, I'll let you know and we'll move on. But if it's not, I'll be happy to answer your question. One other thing about my voice is 3 weeks ago, I had a wonderful little chest cold and I coughed so hard I completely blew out my voice. So don't worry, I'm not contagious. The cold was 3 weeks ago. I am just now getting back to where I can speak. So hopefully it's going to hold up for the whole class. So let's go ahead and get started here. And there we go. So I think what we could do, since only one of you have sprinklers, is we will go ahead and segue into the watering class, and then after class I'll be more than happy to talk to you about your sprinklers. I do want to make it relevant for everybody. So we are going to talk about irrigation system basics, maintenance and repair. We do have to remember these systems are, these automated systems are mechanical, so just like cars, they've got to be maintained. You've got to change your oil, you got to change your filters, you got to rotate the tires, all sorts of stuff like that, because maintenance is going to take care of most of the problems before they become big problems. So it's very, very common in some of the sites we go, the homes we go visit in Gilbert through our water efficiency checkup program, usually caused by somebody who gets all of a sudden a large spike in their water bill. And it's very common that these valves sometimes do not shut off. They're what we call a stuck-on valve, and they run nonstop. And at 1 gallon per minute for 30 days, that's 43,000 gallons of water. These people say, there's no way I could put 43,000 gallons of water in that yard, I'd be underwater. Well, it's 43,000 gallons an hour or 43,000 gallons in a month, but it's at 1 or 2 gallons per hour at all those little spots around the yard, and it will absorb right into the soil. So you want to find those problems before they become major problems or you get that super high water bill. And I do hate to tell you that installation is only the beginning. Yes, they are automatic irrigation systems, but without maintenance, plant health can suffer, sometimes to death. These little emitters that we have out there watering our plants, they clog up. That's just the nature of the beast. It's not if, it's when. They are going to clog up. So you want to catch that before those plants go into stress. The system can deteriorate to the point where replacement is the only option. So most commonly, your residential drip irrigation systems are using this poly tubing. There are some great benefits to it. It's much easier to manipulate as you change things on your irrigation system. Adding in more emitters, so people sometimes will want to do PVC. It is more durable, but now all of a sudden to add in a new emitter, I've got to cut apart the pipe, I've got to glue in new fittings and all that kind of stuff. Whereas here you just poke a hole in the tubing, put in your connector, run your spaghetti tube, and you've got a brand new emission point. It's also very flexible, so you can move it in curves, so you're not stuck in those rigid right angles. However, I have heard over the years that people have said with a straight face that drip irrigation systems, poly ones, will last about 8 to 10 years. That's ridiculous. This is not biodegradable. A properly designed, properly maintained, and properly installed irrigation system. The drip irrigation system that was put in the front yard of my house was built in 1990. It is still the original tubing. It is not biodegradable. However, if you're not doing some of the things we're going to talk about today, as far as things like flushing and stuff like that, this tubing can get so filled with all those minerals that get built up in there, all of a sudden you've got a much skinnier tube than you used to, and you're going to start losing too much pressure, and you're not going to have enough pressure for the end emitters out there. And of course, very important to us all, water can be wasted. We live in a desert. We should not live in spite of it. And as you can tell by my shirt, water conservation is a personal, important thing to me. Very, very personal and very, very important. So not only do we have irrigation systems, but we do have different types of irrigation systems. We have our sprinkler irrigation systems for our grass. And many of you are probably just like me. You came here from somewhere else. I grew up in northeastern Ohio. We had a whole different concept when it came to irrigation. It's called patience. Falls out of the sky all the time and the grass grows and you got to mow it. So even though people aren't real familiar with irrigation systems, you see those sprinkler heads pop up and imitating rainfall, sprinkling water on the grass. It's a very visible system. You understand what's going on. But then all of a sudden you show up and you start looking around your yard and you see all these skinny little black tubes sticking up out of the ground. This is a much more alien irrigation system to newcomers. So yeah, I'm not a native. I've just been here a long, long time. I came to Arizona in 1985. So here's kind of a schematic of a drip irrigation system. Actually, this is usually at the front of the house where the pipe's coming out of the ground and then going into the house. You should have some type of a backflow prevention, kind of like what I have on my display board over there. That makes sure the water, once it goes into the irrigation system, cannot come back to the drinking water. Very, very important. So we use things out in our yards, we use fertilizers, we use pesticides, we use herbicides. Even if you're going full natural and doing composting, which is wonderful, if you're doing composting, you of all people understand what's in it. Do you want to drink it? So we used to say backflow was only a really big issue, like if there was a water main break, so all of a sudden it's sucking all the water out of the pipes out of the neighboring houses. Have you ever gotten home and turned on the faucet and nothing happens for a few seconds and then it starts spitting? That's backflow. Something pulled all the water out of the pipes in your house. Or if there's a fire, those pumper trucks are running at 650 gallons a minute. They will suck the water out of all the homes in about a half-mile radius. So now with our newer meters that we're actually seeing hourly consumption on through our automatic meter infrastructure system, we will see a -1 gallon over the course of an hour. So backflow happens on a regular basis, especially in more urban areas with larger irrigation systems, big high volume irrigation systems. They turn on those pump stations and they cause a little bit of a pressure drop on the entire system, which sucks a little bit of water out of everybody's pipes. So once we use our backflow preventer here, we can go underground with our irrigation valves. And with the drip system, we want to have a filter and a pressure regulator. If it's an automated system, it is going to be wired back to the controller. And once we get outside the box, that's where we transition to our poly tubing, and we just put in our emitters where we need them. If it's a brand new plant, that emitter goes right on top of the root ball. But as they get matured, we're going to add more in, and we're going to move them away from the base, and we do talk about that. And at the end, you want to have a way to open up that line to flush it out. So daily irrigation system maintenance. I'm glad that they didn't give you anything real heavy for giveaways. Paid how much for this automatic system and I have to do it for have something to it every day? No, you just have to pay attention, that's all. Look at the plants. They're going to tell you what's going on, and actually I didn't realize that they do not have the landscape watering by the numbers brochures. When we talk about the watering, this is what you want to follow. So for decades, conservation has told you, oh, water deep and infrequent. Okay, now I know, deep and infrequent. You get to your timer. What does deep and infrequent mean to that timer? This gets you to figure out how much to water your plants in your yard with your irrigation system. People want to be helpful. They'll say, oh, you should run your sprinklers for X amount of minutes. So I do have a small lawn in my backyard. Does anyone have an advice for me for how many minutes I should run my sprinklers?
0.
0. Well, my poor dog. My dog enjoys the grass. It's 600 square feet. It's a tiny little patch. So people say, oh, you water them for like 10 minutes or something. That would kill my grass. I use a very different type of sprinkler nozzle that puts down the water very, very slowly. I run my sprinklers for an hour and a half. So people will tell you with your drip, and if they don't know anything about your drip system, they can do more harm than good. I do have 2 copies here, so maybe Ethan can raffle these off too. If not, you can go to your local public library, especially in Mesa or Gilbert, probably even Queen Creek, and they're going to have them at the libraries. And I think you can actually request them online.
Yes, on our website, you can just fill out a form and we'll mail them to your address.
Perfect. But it can be confusing because if you've got the leaves, the brand new leaves at the very ends of the stem and in the afternoon they wilt, is that overwatering or underwatering?
Over.
That's overwatering. If the leaves are turning brown and curling up, what is that? It's underwatering. There you go. The other thing you want to do is just look at the ground. So I'm still of the generation, I enjoy reading an actual physical newspaper. So when I go out in my driveway in the morning to pick up my newspaper, I just kind of look around, especially if I know my drip system ran that night, because leaks are very easy to spot, even with the system not even on. That is a drip irrigation leak, I know it is, and it's on the piping after the valve, so it only leaks when the valve is running. I don't need to turn it on to see that there's a leak there. I've got a washed out hole in the ground and all the fines are now sitting up on top of the granite. Or if I've got wet spots where there's no emitters, something's going on, there shouldn't be a wet spot there, it's time to turn the system on and find out what's going on. The other thing you want to do is look at your hardscape. So you're going to check your sidewalks, your driveways, your pool decking and patios, and your walls and fences. This is an example for sprinklers. So this is a commercial site right next to my office in Gilbert, and I can tell you exactly where those 2 sprinkler heads are.
Yeah.
There's one, and there's one. So those are the large rotor sprinklers for large areas, and they're just out of adjustment, and they spray the wall every time they come around. So not only are they not putting the water out where they need it, all the minerals in our water, most notably calcium here, is staining that nice, beautiful colored block wall. So those of you that have pools, how do you get that calcium off there? Muriatic acid. So I'd have to mix up a muriatic acid solution to scrub that off the walls, and as that acid runs down into the grass, what's going to happen? It's going to kill that grass. Well, it'll fill back in. It's Bermuda grass. It's the toughest weed on the planet. But it's going to be pretty ugly for a while. That's why new landscape designs, good landscape designs, will always have a buffer between grass and any kind of hardscape, because sprinklers get knocked out of adjustment. It happens. And by the way, we don't put those minerals in the water just to make the water softener people a lot of money. Geologically, that's the water we get. So we could treat the water so that's not in there. On a utility scale, what would that do to your water bill? Quadruple it. So monthly system maintenance, no matter what type of system you have, The best way to do it is to start at that timer. Number one, you're still standing up and not muddy. That's a good thing. But you also want to make sure the program that you've got in there is appropriate for the season. Your standard irrigation timers, it's up to you to change the watering as the weather changes. Unless you have one of those new smart irrigation timers that measures the weather every single day. Does anyone have a smart timer? Nobody? Wow. Anyone here winter visitors? Nope. A couple of you? So yeah, before you leave in the spring, you've got to set it to water for June's water needs, where it's nowhere near June's water needs by the time when you leave. So, and then also in the fall, by the time you get back, it's overwatering. So if you get a smart timer that measures the weather every day, it's going to make those adjustments for you. But the thing is we run our irrigation through the middle of the night, especially sprinkler systems. So don't go do your inspections in the middle of the night with a flashlight. Turn the system on in the daytime. So you want to start at the timer. So for okay, these are any type of system you have. We'll go straight to semi-annual maintenance. You may want to consider replacing that backup battery in your controller if it has one. Do check with your controller manual to see what type of battery it has. What these do, if the power goes out, it holds the information, your program in there. If not, many of them go back to what's called a default program, which is once a day, 10 minutes every day. And that's not how you want to water your desert plants on drip irrigation. So the manufacturers will tell you to change that battery once a year. However, they don't live in Arizona. So the heat really deteriorates those batteries. So like Labor Day and Memorial Day are real good ways to remember to change that battery. Some newer controllers, like the one I have here, does not have a user replaceable battery. It's got a lithium-ion battery inside the panel itself. And what's really funny is Rainbird advertises that as a 100-year battery. I'm not going to be around to disprove them. The other thing you want to do is inspect your valve boxes. We go to great lengths to hide our irrigation systems. We don't want to look at them, and we want to keep them protected. So we bury these valves underground in these boxes. And a lot of times we'll even put those boxes somewhere where you don't normally go, so you don't even see the boxes. So you want to turn on the system, open it up, and look for any leaks. Clean out any excess dirt. They do tend to get filled in with dirt. You don't want your valves buried in the dirt. And you want to check your wire connections. So here's a commercial irrigation valve. So it's nice and clean. It's not filled in with dirt. It is a drip irrigation valve, so you can see that you've got your filter. For some reason, they're using a very expensive brass pressure regulator there instead of one like you'd typically see at your home. And you've got your wires going back to your valves. And one thing you want to do is make sure that whoever installed your system didn't make the mistake, which is the most common electrical failure in residential drip irrigation systems. So what they'll do is they'll use a plain old wire nut to connect the wire from the timer going back to your valve. So you strip a little insulation off each of the wires, and you stick it on there and you twist it till it's snug. That's a great wire connection, but you're underground in that valve box. So there's always moisture in there. It's always going to be damp when you look inside your valve box. Standing water, that's a leak, but dampness is normal, and these wires are copper. So you get that copper in that highly moist area, what's going to happen? It's going to corrode. They're going to get that green gunk on there. It's a very low voltage, low amperage signal coming from that controller. This will stop the signal from actually reaching the valve, and it won't open anymore. So you want to make sure you're using waterproof wire connectors. So they do make the wire nuts that have these little flanges on them because they're filled with silicone. So these do work. However, if you ever replace them, what you don't want to do is reuse this, because where'd all the silicone go when you pulled it off? It's all stuck on the wires. So you want to actually make sure you put on a new waterproof wire connector. That's why when we teach professional landscape contractors how to do it, we teach them how to use these more professional waterproof wire connectors called pentites or dry splices. So you bring your two wires up through there and you twist them together. You got a little copper collar you crimp on there. Then you've got a silicone filled cap. Mine's empty because I want to use it for display. And you snap it together. And after that's been snapped together, you can't take it apart again. So that means whoever does have to do a replacement on that solenoid, they're forced to cut this off and put on a new wire connector. Either way works, just as long as you put on a new wire connector after a repair. So yeah, a lot of times you open up these valve boxes and they're filled with dirt. So this is actually right, because the manufacturer is very, very clear about how many valves are supposed to go in this box, aren't they? One pipe in, one pipe out. But we have tools. So what we'll do is we'll cut big chunks out of the sides of these boxes so we can get more pipes in and out, and then we got a lot of dirt migrating into the box. And if you do have a small leak inside your box, something that's going constant, you'll never see it because it may only be 20 or 50 gallons a month, so it's not going to impact your water bill where you're billed in 1,000-gallon units. K-gals or CCF? K-gals. K-gals, okay. Yeah, 1,000-gallon units. But if it's constantly wet underneath there, there's something in your yard. Now, but think about this before you answer the question. What in your yard, and this is the whole reason why you put in an irrigation system, what in your yard is attracted to moist soil? Rats? You put in an irrigation system for the rats? That's very generous.
No, but they show up more when it's wet.
Roots. When you run your irrigation system, you're not watering plants. You're watering roots. So I don't have it anymore because it got too dried out, but I had an irrigation valve as a display that I cut out that was completely engulfed in tree root. Just being buried in soil, and it had that small leak. So it was probably just a little O-ring underneath that solenoid. So it was probably never visible. And that tree root found it though. Okay, so let's get to the bones here with the drip irrigation maintenance. The handouts you have are the full handout for the full class I do, which is a 2.5-hour class. So it's going to go a lot more in depth than we're going to go in this class. It's going to talk about your sprinklers. It'll talk about bubblers. And it even has stuff about troubleshooting, which it can be very, very handy because irrigation systems know when Home Depot closes. So Friday night at 11 o'clock is when you've got the gushing water. So I don't want you going crazy trying to figure out what's going on. Your most common symptoms of things that can happen to irrigation systems are in there because many people automatically blame the timer because that's the part that's above ground. That's the part you see. So it's things like stuck-on valves and all that sort of stuff. We talk about how to figure out what's going on there. But drip irrigation systems do require more maintenance and more time to maintain than sprinkler irrigation systems. So those of you that have ever had a sprinkler system, if you've ever had a broken sprinkler head, how long does it take to find that out?
About 5 seconds.
About 5 seconds. You got a 30-foot geyser of water shooting out of the ground. Drip irrigation is not only low volume, it's low pressure. So you don't get 20-foot geysers of water from those leaks. So you actually want to walk around when you're doing your inspection. So again, we run into that with the water efficiency checkups, those home visits we do for our residents in Gilbert. You know, they get that high bill and they're like, oh my gosh, I've got a slab leak, I'm terrified. We look at the meter and say, no, you have no constant leak. We can read these meters down to 1/100th of a gallon. No problem, you don't have a leak. Let's look at your drip system. Oh, I don't have any leaks out there. You turn that thing on, start walking around. There's a leak, there's a leak, there's a leak. So now instead of only needing 1/2 gallon per minute when it's running, it's now running at 8 gallons per minute from all the leaks. The components are more fragile. We did talk about that. PVC systems are more durable, but these are more easy to change and modify as your landscape grows and or changes. So if you don't know where your drip lines are and you got to dig a hole for whatever reason, I recommend you have that drip system on and running at the time because it is a universal reaction. It crosses gender, nationality, even religious beliefs. Anyone on the planet digging a hole in the ground that has water all of a sudden come gushing out of it always does what? They stop digging instantly. It works every time. But now you know you've got to make a repair on your line, and then you've got to flush out all that dirt you got in there that's going to clog up all your emitters. And the problems can be a lot more subtle. Like I said, you don't get those 30-foot geysers. You get a stuck-on drip valve. It'll run for a month, and if you're not paying attention and seeing those wet patterns around those emitters getting bigger and bigger, that water's just going to soak right into the ground. So for monthly drip irrigation system maintenance, you want to turn it on, check for leaks or damage to your emitters, connectors, tubing. And again, walking plant by plant by plant. Make sure all your emission points are still visible. Some people actually cut those things so short because they don't want to see those little black skinny tubes sticking out of the ground. And over the course of time, they get buried. So there are two things underground that you do not want in your drip system. They are the enemies of drip irrigation system. One of them is the ground. Dirt is the enemy of drip emitters. Think about it. If you've got an emitter that only goes down to ½ gallon per hour, how small is that orifice to slow down that water to that delivery rate? A grain of sand will clog up that emitter. The other thing that's underground that you don't want in your drip irrigation system, we already talked about. What in your yard is attracted to moist soil? Roots. Did a repair in an apartment community that for some reason had poly tubing instead of PVC line, and I pulled out 150 feet of tubing filled with eucalyptus tree root. So I brought the community manager down there, showed her what was going on, and she says, wow, it was working fine last week. Eucalyptus trees are fast, but they're not that fast. Somebody made too big of a hole for the emitter. So there was a small leak there that was never enough to come to the surface, but that tree root found it, got inside that tubing, and then just started growing up towards that valve. Make sure any tubing that gets above ground and is exposed gets reburied quickly. Sunlight degrades this poly tubing extremely quickly, and it actually starts becoming brittle, where if you step on it, it's going to crumble. Kind of like, same way, sunlight is bad for PVC pipe. We call this sunburnt PVC pipe. Should never have PVC pipe exposed above ground. This is going to become brittle. It's a leak waiting to happen. All your piping above ground should be copper. And of course, no matter how good of a gardener you are, sooner or later a plant will die. For whatever reason, sometimes we just don't know why. And if that happens in June, do you want to go out and dig a hole and put a plant in the ground in June? You can. Landscapers work year round, but do you want to go out there, be digging in the yard at 120 degrees? You may want to wait till fall, which is a better time to plant anyway. So that way the plant has time to get situated throughout the cooler winter months before it hits the next heat of summer. Has a chance to grow some roots. So what you can do, is everyone familiar with the goof plugs? Yep. Yep, they come on these little trees. So you make a goof, you plug it up. So if you don't want that emitter watering until you're going to replant that plant, you cut that emitter off and you put a goof plug on there. Then next fall, when you put in your plant, you cut that off, put your emitter back on, you're back in business. So honestly though, one emitter running where that plant used to be, probably not a huge waste of water. But one of the jobs I had before Gilbert was I worked for the City of Mesa Water Conservation Office, and I did a lot of work with our internal customers there too, like our streets department, on all the median and right-of-way landscapes. And in all the turn lanes and the medians, they put in purple lantana, surrounded by 6 lanes of asphalt. How long do you think that lantana lasted? About a year at most. So I was turning on all these drip systems and seeing 50 emitters in these little turn lanes watering nothing. So Mesa did get smarter about that. They don't plant plants there anymore. They do the stamped concrete to make it look like brick. So if on a normal sized yard, you're talking about a few minutes to walk around your yard. That's all there is, assuming you didn't run into any problems. For semi-annual drip irrigation maintenance, you want to make sure the emitters are placed correctly. And again, when you run your irrigation system, what are you watering? The roots. Roots. Yeah, stop thinking you're watering plants. So here's a commercial installation, and nobody ever moves these emitters out as the plant grows. So all your woody shrubs and woody trees, all the water absorption happens at the very ends of the root systems. So they get finer and finer and finer, all the way down to about the texture of hair. They're actually called root hairs. That's where the water absorption happens. And you want to do everything you can to encourage the growth of those roots. Because what do the roots do for the trees? Hold it in the ground. Every time we have a rainstorm here, watch the evening news. I don't care what channel, they're going to have some poor slob out there standing next to a tree laying on the ground. Look at the roots of that tree. More importantly, the lack thereof. A lot of our desert adapted trees are very opportunistic. They actually do all their canopy growth during the wet season, and they do their root development during the dry season. But here we've got 3 2-gallon per hour emitters around the base of this new tree that are watering 3 days a week all year round. When is the dry season? Sometimes we get lucky and the trees ignore our foolishness and they grow out and find water elsewhere from other emitters, but other times they don't. They say, I'm happy with my roots here and I'm just going to keep growing my canopy and getting heavier and heavier and heavier. So what this guy did is he wanted a 4-gallon per hour emitter on the root ball of that new tree that was eventually going to be just completely capped off. And he wanted 5 more emitters out around the edge of where the future canopy line or drip line of that tree was going to be. Now, when this tree was still a baby, before it got its roots out here, were they wasting water? Technically, yes, they were watering soil where there were no roots at that point in time. I work in water conservation, I live in the real world. So in our design class, we teach people to go ahead and put in all your emitters at your future canopy edge location at the time of installation. And if you're doing it at your house, you have the opportunity to just goof plug them off until the tree gets out there. So that was a really great irrigation design. Unfortunately, the installer did not quite get the gist. He just said, wow, 6 4-gallon per hour emitters? Okie dokie. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Emitter number 6 was around the trunk of that tree. You like that nice white line on the trunk there? What do you think that is? And what else is in our water? What's the name of that river? Salt. That's because it has a sodium content. And actually, water from the Colorado River has a higher sodium content. Very nice thing that acacia species is very salt tolerant. The other thing that's going on here is look at what that soil looks like, how damp it is. When our soil is dry, it's a consistency of what? Concrete. What do we do before we dig? Water. We get it wet so it's pliable. Where that tree is anchored to the ground, do we want concrete or do we want Play-Doh? That's the other reason why you want to move those emitters out. Encourage a root growth and keep the area at the base of that tree nice and dry. So you want to water at the drip line, and I use trees as the example, but it's also good to do for your shrubs to encourage that wider root system. It also makes them easier to inspect. So nobody ever moves their emitters out. So when we do our checkups in Gilbert, when we're walking by the shrubs, I don't play Indiana Jones looking for those emitters. I just listen for leaks when I walk by. If I don't hear a leak, one of 2 things are going on. The emitter's operating properly, or it's clogged up, and it's a really tough plant that lives on something that many irrigators don't want you to think about. All those Palo Verde trees, all those foothills Palo Verde trees out there, how many emitters did I put underneath those trees? None. They live on what? Rain. It's amazing. They live on rainfall. Plants will do that. They've been doing it for eons before we invented drip irrigation. Okay, so what we want to do is think about it, and again, I'm using trees as an example. When people are out in the middle of nowhere, where do we tend to go? Under the trees. Is that because it's wetter? No, it's drier. The tree's actually doing its own water harvesting. It's taking a bunch of the water that hits the canopy and sheds it off on the edge of that canopy, what we call the drip line. So that's where you want to focus your emitters on. The more you mimic nature with your drip system, the better off you'll be. So what if you don't move them? Like I said, sometimes we get lucky and the trees ignore our ignorance, but sometimes they don't. That was about a 25 to 30 foot canopy tree. So this was actually a winter rain event. There was no high winds during this. So it wasn't one of our summer thunderstorms. And as I was walking up to this tree, I had my coworker with me and I commented, wow, they spent a lot of money on that tree. They put in a 48-inch box. How could I possibly know what size container that came from the nursery in? Because a 48-inch square is what popped out of the ground. There's a better look at it. I could literally put a tape measure on that and measure 48 inches. I didn't get a photo of it because it was all buried in the granite, but there were 3 2-gallon per hour emitters right at the base of that tree. Okay, for annual drip maintenance, you want to flush out your filters. So like I said, a properly installed system, when you're looking at it, you should see your irrigation valve, your filter, and a pressure regulator because they're low volume and they're low pressure. So that filter, there are some contractors out there that say, oh, you're using that nice clean city water. You don't need a filter. Well, it's true. You're not pulling water out of an irrigation ditch like the farmers. And that water that comes out of the water treatment plant is extremely clean. There's nothing in it. How many miles of pipe does it go through before it gets to your house? How old are some of those pipes? So you get some of that mineral buildup flaking off inside those main lines. So your filters are typically just a nylon mesh screen. So you want to make sure they're not all clogged up with anything. You also want to make sure there's no tears or holes in them. So let me get my photo up here. So yeah, most of your residential ones, they use the less expensive filters that is just a nylon mesh screen. And if anything sharp comes through the system and gets in there, when that zone is running, it's rubbing on that screen. If this gets a hole in it, is this a filter? No, it's a $12 coupling. That's why if you come to our design class, we tell you to use better quality components because 99% of your system is below ground. So you can buy a better filter with a stainless steel mesh screen in it that you don't have to worry about getting holes in it. Yes, sir?
Typically, where is that? By the,
Right after the valve, underground inside the box. So that's where you should see it. So what you want to do is open this up, and if you guys were paying attention to my earlier photo kind of showing a schematic of a drip system, I had the filter in front of the valve. That's why we wanted to do it, because that diaphragm is just barely lifting off the seat inside there when it's operating a drip system. Unfortunately, most of your filters will crack right there because they're not made for that constant pressure or the pressure surge when the valve shuts off. The manufacturer said, okay, well, you can put them behind the valve, no big deal, but you're pointing them in the wrong direction. You have to point them pointing down, because that way when you open it, whatever's in that screen is going to come out and not go back down into the pipe as if it were this way. We said, now wait a minute, these are underground in a box. How big does that box have to be and how deep does it have to be? And that's why all your modern filters out there have these flush caps on them. So what you're going to do is you're just going to unscrew that cap before you take it apart, and you're going to turn that system on. Now you're before the pressure regulator, the water's moving in this direction, so you're at full pressure, so you're going to have a 20-foot geyser of water shooting out of that valve box, unless it's right up against the edge of the box. Now you're going to fill up that valve box in about 7 seconds, stirring up the leaves and twigs and dirt and other things that live in your valve boxes. You never want that dirty water higher than your open filter, because when you turn it off, now you're putting dirt back into it. So I've got good news for you, especially the hoarders of the household. How many of you have that short chunk of garden hose you won't throw away because it has the good end on it? Good, I'm not the only one who's run over my garden hose with a lawnmower. This is hose thread, not pipe thread. So what I can do is take off that cap, put my short hose out there, make sure your spouse sees you using it, and put this end out at the root zone, a drip line of a tree where it'll take advantage of that water. Now I can flush out that filter nice and clean before I open it up and keep my box nice and dry. Yes, sir?
If you have the sheet filters, can you retrofit them?
You'd have to dig it up, cut everything apart, and reinstall everything, because it's all glued and screwed in there.
But can you just take the old filter out and put a new stainless steel filter in?
No. The manufacturer doesn't make them so they're interchangeable. Let me put my cap back on. However, once again, if you came to our design class, that's one thing about these valve boxes. If I do have to replace the filter, what does this box do for me?
Easy access.
But how do I take out the filter when it's glued and screwed into everything else in there? Can't. This box tells you where to dig the big hole to take out the box, cut everything apart, put everything back together, and put the box back in. However, there are fittings in plumbing that have nothing to do with better wages or benefits. They're called unions, and they allow you to disassemble pipe without cutting it. So I could undo these 2 unions inside that box and lift this whole assembly right outside without even digging it up. Now these Schedule 80 3/4 inch unions are about $14 to $15 a piece. It's just up to you. How much do you enjoy digging? Or how much would you rather not dig? What is not having to dig worth to you? I put unions on all my irrigation installations. Okay. Next thing you want to do, there we go, is flush out our tubing. Now, a very common way people will do this on residential segments is they will use what they call a figure-8 closure. It's just doing nothing more than folding over and kinking off the tubing. Unfortunately, it's got to be sticking up above ground so you can have access to it, so it gets deteriorated by the sunlight. Dogs will chew on it. All sorts of things will happen to it. That's why I prefer to put them underground inside these little round boxes like I have on my display here. But on my display here, you also see I'm using a threaded cap, not this fitting like this where I just slide it down and let the tubing open. Because inside that box, I don't have enough room to open that back up. Now I'm all the way out at the end of the line behind that pressure regulator. So I don't have full city pressure anymore. So when I open up that cap inside that box, do I have a 20-foot geyser of water shooting out of it? No. It's going to come out much faster than normal, but it's still just going to fill up that box in no time whatsoever. So once again, make sure your spouse sees you using it, because the thread on these caps is not pipe thread, it's hose thread. So I can connect that up after I take my cap off, lay that out to the root zone of a tree, and flush out my line. Now you should do this once a year, kind of like draining and flushing your water heaters. Does anyone do that? Good idea, because we have all that mineral buildup over the course of years. When I first moved into my house in 2003, the guy before me did not know how to take care of a house. It was the original water heater, and I had the element burnout. It's electric water heater. No biggie, I know how to replace a water heater element, put it in, a week later it burned out again. That's how much mineral had built up in there. It was completely over the top of where that element was, and it was making it superheat and burn out. So luckily I was able to get everything flushed out and then get a new element in there. If you have never flushed your irrigation system and you've been in your house for a number of years, I want you to be where you can see what the water looks like when it first comes out of there. You will become a firm believer in flushing your lines every year. Remember, like I said, drip irrigation systems, poly systems last longer than 8 to 10 years. They're not biodegradable. So again, flushing them out. I've run into systems where it's like my last emitters, there's just no water coming out. It just barely drips. I'm not getting my 1 gallon per hour. It looks like I'm getting a gallon in maybe 20 hours. That's because they just don't have the pressure there anymore. That's because I've opened these systems up and they're more than half full with that calcium. Okay. So, finding your flush caps. So here we've got a nice well-designed irrigation system for our drip because we are running one line just for our trees. Excuse me. So if you don't know where your end caps are, look at the aerial photograph of your house. You know where your valve is. Look for the tree that is the farthest away from that valve and start looking around in that area. Now for our shrub valve, we have what's called a trunk system where we're using the T fittings to go in different directions. So I'd have an end cap here, an end cap here, an end cap here, and an end cap here. On these, you do them one at a time and start with the one closest to the valve and one by one work your way out to the furthest. The reason is, especially for this one that is the furthest away from the valve, if I've already done this one and flushed it out, this segment of the line has already been flushed. So at this point, I'm really only flushing out that. Again, if you don't know where they are, again, visualize where your valve is. I would say, wow, those are probably the furthest shrubs, unless they did not have sleeves to get underneath the driveways. So I'd say, how did they get the water down here? They may have had to come all the way around the house. So in that case, my end cap might be down here by these shrubs. Okay, I had to change this because my old CAD drawings, I can't open those files on modern CAD software anymore. And this is where we start adding more emitters in as plants and trees grow. So you'll see a brand new 2-foot wide plant, one emitter, we're irrigating easily 50% of that root zone. Whereas when this tree starts getting bigger, we've got a 10-foot canopy, we want to start moving them out and adding more in, because if we still only had one emitter, we're only watering about 5% of that root system. And then when we get big trees, I've got lots of emitters here. I've even got some underneath the canopy. These might actually be shrub emitters. That might be a shrub emitter. But I'm still going to look at it as far as that tree is likely getting water from it. Because as that tree is expanding out its root system and it gets underneath that emitter, do you think the tree says, oh, I'm sorry, shrub, I didn't realize that was your emitter? That's going to take it. They've done studies on some of our native desert trees out there where they have found these trees will have root systems 5 times the width of their canopy. So these trees out in the native desert living on rainfall are fishing for rain. And if you're a fisherman and you want to catch more fish, what do you get?
Bigger net.
Bigger net or dynamite. Okay, we're going to skip the lawn irrigation maintenance so we can talk about watering. Well, we'll talk about pipe repairs and then we'll talk about watering, and then I'll talk to you afterwards about taking care of your sprinklers. So let's blow through this. Oh, there we go. I love that photo. We've got good water pressure in some parts of Gilbert. So how much water is he wasting from that broken sprinkler head?
None is going in the pool.
There you go. That's his automatic pool fill. But he pulled the pressure off the line, so now these other heads don't have the right amount of pressure, and you're starting to see some stress in there. There we go, drip emitters. Now typically, when you're installing emitter, you should use an emitter hole punch, not a nail, because you can make the wrong size hole. It's supposed to be a very, very snug fit, so it's watertight. So the other thing about using a hole punch is it stops before it goes through the other side, which is important because where's my other hand when I make that hole? If I use a nail and I accidentally pushed it all the way through, now I've got 3 holes and this one's bleeding. This one's leaking already. So very commonly, many landscapers will take that emitter, and this tubing's really, really cold in this room. They will pop that emitter directly into the tubing and run your spaghetti up. How are we doing on time? We're doing great. So that's where people get confused. They say, well, I don't have any emitters. Well, yes, you do. It's just installed directly on the tubing. Unfortunately, when this clogs up, not if, what do you have to do to replace it? You got to dig it up. You've got to pull it out. That hole is too big to reuse. You have to use the fat side of the goof plug, make a new hole, and put your new emitter in. I'm going to cheat and put this back in here. And that's all because they did not want to use this 4-cent connector. So a better way to do it in most cases is I'm going to make a new hole, and I'm going to put in this little connector, and I'm going to put on some spaghetti line, and then I'm going to put my emitter at the end. There we go. So now my emitter is at the end up above ground. So when that emitter clogs up, what do I need to do to replace it? Cut it off. Don't pull it off. It's already mushroomed out the end of that spaghetti. So if I pull it off and reuse it, the new one will just pop off. So you got to cut back to clean spaghetti and then put a new one on. So now when it comes to moving emitters out farther, all you have to do is cut off this emitter, and I'm going to cheat. Oops, let me find a little bit more spaghetti here. There we go. So if I need to extend it, all I do is cut that emitter off, cut back to clean spaghetti, and I'm going to put a new connector in. And I'm just going to add some new spaghetti line to it, and then put my new emitter out at the new location at the end of the tubing, which works pretty well. So let's find my emitter and put them back on there.
Those connectors don't stay clogged up?
No, because they're wide open.
I see.
Okay, I'll use a different emitter. Where'd all my other emitters go? I had 3 emitters sitting here, now I'm only, oh, there's one. Okay. So now I'm going to put this guy out there, and it should be a very snug fit. Now there is a company that makes this spaghetti tubing in vinyl rather than poly tubing, polyethylene, and it's super easy to put those emitters on, which means what happens? They pop right off. So now I've got my emitter out here, and this is generally the preferred way because it's easier to maintain and repair, except for you guys kind of live out kind of in a more open and rural area, more in a wild area. So what happens when you have your emitters like this is Bunny Foo-Foo is not happy with 1.5 gallon per hour. So what do? They chew off your spaghetti tubing right underneath that emitter. Well, I don't want my emitter all the way back at the poly tubing, but I don't want it above ground. Well, there's a spot to put more spaghetti on the output side, isn't there? So what I can do is I can run my spaghetti as far as I need it to go, and then attach a very short piece of spaghetti and bring that back up above ground. So now I've got my emitter right next to where it comes out of the ground. Bunny Foo-Foo can chew this to the ground. I'm still controlling my emission point here, and it's not very far to dig up. It's very easy to replace. This is actually how I recommend to the people at DBG, Desert Botanical Garden, that they do their installs. Because they do have those little ground squirrels out there, and they do have some bunny rabbits, which is funny because that garden is surrounded with chicken wire. But where the employees go in at that back gate where I used to go in when I was teaching classes there, with the big sign that says keep gate closed, I've never seen it closed. So they get all the rodents in there eating at their polytubing. Sorry guys, I'm trying not to cough, but okay, there we go. In the right direction. Now, a couple important things while I'm talking about emitters here. First of all, you want to make sure you're using emitters that do what's called pressure compensation. Old cheap emitters are just a hole in a piece of plastic. Like this guy here. Does anyone recognize that emitter? Got the little flag on it? That's a hole in a piece of plastic. The more pressure you have, the more water comes out. The less pressure, less water. And you always lose water pressure when you move water through pipe. It's called friction loss. So what's going to happen there is, I've seen this happen because I have been here a long time, though I'm not a native, is I will park on the other side of a parking lot to have my car in shade. And as I'm going through that shopping plaza and I'm looking at that oleander shrub, it starts magically getting shorter and shorter and shorter. They're not using pressure compensating emitters, and these are getting less water than those. And because they're oleanders, the only difference is they grow slower. So that guy with the head shears is following that natural growth rate. Pressure compensating emitters within a range of pressures still put out that 1/2, 1, or 2 gallon per hour. Now the other thing about flag emitters, and I've got another smaller one here, but it actually has the new colored flags on it. What does the red flag mean on a flag emitter?
How many gallons comes out of it?
Yep, that's 2 gallons per hour. It is at exactly 15 psi. Anything more than that and you start getting more water coming out. Now a 1 gallon per hour emitter that is truly delivering 1 gallon of water per hour, when you look at the water coming out, you're going to see constant but individual drips of water. It's going to be going drip, 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 drip. Why do you think we call it drip irrigation? Now what does the water look like coming out of most of these flag emitters?
Constant.
It's a stream of water. Oh, but it's a 2 gallon per hour emitter. Yeah, at 15 psi. So the other thing is you'll have some of these actually dripping at 2 gallons per hour and some of them putting out the streams. So now all of a sudden, how do I program in runtime for that wildly different delivery rate? So the other thing is in irrigation, we can use a formula to calculate out the precipitation rate in inches per hour based on flow and area. So that stream of water hitting that 1 square inch of soil, let's say it's 10 gallons of water per hour, that is equivalent to 62 inches of water per hour. There is no soil on the planet that can actually percolate 62 inches or infiltrate 62 inches of water in an hour. Beach sand can't do it. So that's where we see these set up with like these 15-minute run times, because that gives you about the right size wet spot underneath the plant. But it's just with our clay soil, it's flowing across the surface and you're only watering that deep. You're not getting the water down deep. Whereas that slow drip emitter, drip, 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 that's actually going to soak in. Now you're more up in the foothills than I am in Gilbert and Mesa. We have a heavy clay soil there, so you might have a more coarser soil up here, more gravelly and sandy soil. But in that clay soil, that 1 gallon per hour emitter, because it's such a tight soil, as that water is percolating down under the emitter, capillary action is pulling it sideways. So when you see those, you got your wet spot on your emitter there, you're actually looking at the top of a big onion shape. Now, depending on your soil, if you're much more coarse rather than a clay soil like we have in the valley floor there, you actually do want to put down your water a little faster to force it to spread out. You're also going to have to water a little bit more often because a coarse soil doesn't hold the water as well as our clay soil does. A lot of people don't like the clay soil in the valley. Oh, it's terrible soil. Why was our economy based on agriculture then? Clay soil is a great soil to grow plant material in because it has a very high water holding capacity. Hard to get the water in without causing runoff, but once it's in there, it stays there a good long time. Flag emitters. They're not even any cheaper than good quality pressure compensating emitters. But what I say is in the right direction. You'll notice on these Rainbird emitters, they've got a pointy side and then a blunt side. I've seen people put these in backwards, and the way they do their pressure compensation is with a diaphragm. When you put them in backwards, it blows open the diaphragm, and now I've got a little miniature geyser going on. And most of your emitters, companies, will color code their emitters so you know what the flow rate is. There's no industry standard for it, so whatever brand of emitters you use, learn their colors. Okay. Okay, adding or more emitters. We already covered this. Use your hole punch, put in your 1/4 inch connector, add your spaghetti, install your emitter. Let's blow by sprinkler repairs, and let's go to pipe repairs. There we go, PVC pipe. If you ever have to cut and glue PVC pipe, and you will have PVC pipe in your drip systems, because once you go underground from your backflow preventer, that distance from where that is to wherever your valves are PVC pipe. So that actually can handle the higher pressure. Now, socket fittings on PVC pipe are tapered. So you got to make sure you get a nice straight cut. So don't be using your hacksaws. What you want to do is get a low-cost ratcheting PVC cutter. So one of the things these do really nicely is they automatically line up the pipe and hold it for you to give a nice straight cut so it goes all the way into that socket. Also, the hacksaw leaves all that fuzz behind that you've got to clean off. And if you don't get it all, that can be something that gets inside your valve and causes it to not close. What we call a stuck-on valve. Now they make that glue out there, that red hot blue glue. I prefer to use primer and glue, because the primer is going to clean the pipe, especially existing pipe that's been underground. It's dirty. You want that nice and clean. It's also going to start pre-softening the plastic. So I'm going to do some primer inside the fitting, primer on the pipe, and then swab inside the fitting again. Then I'm going to take the glue, and all of you are using small diameter pipe out there. You're not using 4-inch pipe in your irrigation systems. So the nice clear PVC cement. I'm going to take a nice thin even layer all the way around here. So it is fusing or melting the plastic together. Enough glue is important. More glue is not better. It's actually worse. So I'm going to swab inside the fitting, and then I've got to make sure I seat it completely. And if it's not connected at the other end, I want to give it a twist. And because it's tapered, hold it until it sets, about 5 seconds. Otherwise, it will push back out. After that, it's set, it's going to be in there, you're good to go. Although you have the advantage of waiting a few hours before you repressurize that system, so that way you don't blow apart a brand new fitting. Yeah, if you use too much glue, you get that puddled up inside there and it'll skin over on the top. And underneath, what do you think happens? It just melts right through your pipe and it blows out again. Now remember, I've got to get this, whenever I'm doing a repair from this piece of pipe over to this piece of pipe, I've got to make sure I get it all the way in there. So I've got to dig a really big trench to lift it up and put it back down. But there's fittings out there that make that repair much easier. This is a compression coupling, so you're just going to cut your pipes to where they're just about meeting up. And before you glue it to this point, make sure you put this on, because every irrigator in the world has done it, where we've glued it together and then picked up our compression coupling and went, oh crap. All it is an oversized barrel with very large O-rings inside there. So let me put this guy on and kind of line it up to where that's going to be about the middle between those two pieces of pipe, and tighten it down with a wrench. So that way I don't have to worry about digging this giant trench to lift the pipe up to get it back inside that fitting. So you'll hear landscapers say, well, you know, that rubber in there, sooner or later it's going to leak. Maybe 50 years from now. That's a pretty thick piece of rubber. So they say, I don't like to use that. I like to use these telescopic fittings instead. So what I'm going to do with this one, so I'm going to glue it into this regular straight coupling, and then I'm going to have the other end of my pipe cut it just the right length to meet that when I extend it. What's really funny about them saying they use these because of those rubber O-rings in there, this has a very tiny O-ring inside there. It's going to deteriorate much faster than that ever will, but they don't have to remember to bring the wrenches from the truck. So they'll say, oh, make sure you're going in the direction of the water when you extend it. That's ridiculous. If you get a good glue joint on both sides, it's not going to collapse on itself. But it is important to get full extension on it, because if you don't, that O-ring doesn't make the seal, and you've got a small leak right there. Other thing is you want to wait to glue that pipe, cut it open it, let it drain out all the water on the pipe until it's no longer draining any water, which can take a long time, depending on where it is on your system. So that's why they developed that blue glue. It's really, really hot, so if you've got just barely a drip coming out, you can still glue it. However, a lot of my landscaping friends out there, they get called back to redo those pipe repairs all the time because people think, oh, I don't need to wait for this to drain. They've got water gushing out and they try and glue it. What you can do is if you've got that little drip constantly coming out and you're waiting forever for it to stop, is use an old plumber's trick. What happens to white bread when you throw it in water? Dissolves. So you take a little piece of white bread, put it in a ball, not a tight ball, shove it up inside that pipe. Now you've blocked the water from dripping out there when you do your repair. Turn it on, it's just going to blast that white bread right apart. Okay. Depending on time of year and temperature and humidity and all these weird factors, it takes a while for that glue to fully cure. But here in Arizona, in the wintertime, if you wait till tomorrow, that's perfectly fine. In the summertime, a few hours on this small diameter pipe is fine. But one thing is with the ball valves you have on your backflow preventers, if the handle is parallel to the pipe, it's on. If it's perpendicular to the pipe, it's off. So that's typically where you're going to shut off the water to your irrigation system to do your repair. Now you let all that water drain out of that pipe. I can turn this back on to full flow in less than a second. You don't want to do that because now that water's running at about 25 feet per second through that pipe. And if I've got the weakest little elbow joint right there, it's going to blow it right off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and I'm going to listen. I'm just barely going to crack it open until I hear some water flowing through there, so I slowly refill that pipe. Then I can open it up all the way. Okay, poly tubing. Oh, definitely you want to flush out that system after the repair. You've got some dirt in there. I don't care how careful you were. You've got some dirt in there. You want to flush it out. Poly tubing. Like I said, this is the easiest to deal with. This is Legos for big kids, no torches, saws, or glue. So you can buy these really nifty poly tubing cutters and cut it to whatever length you want. Most of us, however, we just use our pruning shears. Want to make sure your pruning shears are nice and sharp though, especially if you're going to then use these to prune your plants. Sharpen them back up after you've stuck them down in the dirt. And what you're going to do is you're going to put them in what's called a compression coupling. You're shoving this tubing into a slightly smaller size hole. And depending on where you got your tubing, it may be a slightly different size. So if you're not sure what you've got, cut off a piece and bring it to the irrigation store before you buy your couplings to make sure you're getting the right ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up, and with a little bit of a rocking motion while I'm pushing it in, there we go. Nice and easy. I don't have to get the tubing all the way to the middle. As long as I get it in about an inch or so, that's going to be perfectly fine. It's a low pressure system. That's going to hold. So that was nice and easy, except for I'm standing here holding it right up next to my chest. That's not how it works in the real world. In the real world, you're working on it down in the trench, so you got to get on your knees. Then you've got to lean over to reach it, which means you're off balance, so that's what the third leg of the tripod is for. Move the granite out of the way before you put down the third leg of the tripod. So this does take some grip and forearm strength to be able to put this together. Also, while you're pushing it together, don't accidentally kink the tubing. Oops, I'll just kind of mush that back out. This poly tubing has a memory, so as I'm stomping down the dirt to make it compact again, it will re-kink. And now I've got a restriction and I don't have the pressure I need downstream. Cut it back out and start over. Also, don't use things to make it easier to put in there, like that little blue can we all have in our garage. What's that called? WD-40. Does anyone know what WD-40 was designed to originally be used as? It's a solvent for cleaning aircraft parts. What do you think it's going to do to poly tubing? It will eat right through it. It'll take time, but it'll eat it. And then also, I don't know about you guys, but I haven't seen that little red straw in forever. So I'm going to get WD-40 everywhere, and I can't hold on to it anyway. So just go ahead and get it warm. So if you're doing a new piece of tubing, have it lay in the sun for just a little bit. Once it's warmer, it's much more pliable and easier to put together. If you're doing a repair, get some nice warm water. Big measuring cup out of the microwave, not boiling water, because you're going to slosh as you're walking out there. Don't burn yourselves. Dip your tubing in there, warm it up. It'll be much easier to put together. Now there is a manufacturer that makes a different type of fitting. Some of them, they've got where you stick it inside. You got these little pieces that you slide on there. Those blow apart all the time. Don't use them. This is made by Rainbird. It's called the Easy Fit coupling. It doesn't work by shoving it into a smaller size tube. It works like the old finger handcuff trick. It grabs the tubing from the inside. So it's very importantly with that stuff, well, first of all, really what I can do is I can take 2 fingers and a thumb, 2 fingers and a thumb, and I can put that together. I don't need all that grip strength. However, because it's grabbing it from the inside, see this ragged cut I've got here? That would instantly be a leak. So you got to make sure you've got a very nice, sharp, clean cut. There we go. Now these cost twice as much as those other ones do. Are they worth it? Could be. I don't want to insult anyone, but a good friend of mine I've known for many years, he's the manager of an irrigation supply store. When the little old ladies come in and ask him for drip couplers, he automatically sells them these. They come back later and say, "You're so wonderful, I can fix my drip system. These are so easy to use." So yeah, these are like $2. The other ones are $1 a piece. So it's not a huge difference between the two. Also, when you're pushing the tubing in, it might seem silly, but if you're using T-fittings, don't push that tubing so deep down in there you bottom it out inside the T and wonder why you're not getting very good flow through it. Same thing with your elbows. Actually, some of your better couplings will have little stops in there to make sure you can't bottom that thing out. And now I've got that restriction and I'm not getting the amount of water I need out that end. So that's pretty much about it for drip irrigation pipe repair. We already talked about adding in new emitters and all that kind of stuff. So I think we are set there. Definitely flush it. Real quickly, we're going to talk about valve troubleshooting. Most people have no problem changing out emitters, changing out sprinkler heads, putting in new nozzles, all that sort of stuff. But if the problem is in here, they're like, oh my gosh, I need to hire a professional now. You have no idea how simple these things are. It'll take about 5 minutes for this, and then we'll get into the watering. Step 1, determine if the problem is electrical or hydraulic. Yes, they are getting an electrical signal from the valve. This should have 2 wires. It's an old sample. But it's using the water itself inside the valve to open and close it by opening and closing a port underneath this solenoid. So what we're going to do is we're going to manually open up the valve. If the valve opens, the problem is electrical. If the valve doesn't open, the problem is hydraulic. So electrical valve problems. If the valve won't open, the wire connection is corroded. Somebody used a wire nut instead of a waterproof wire connector. So if you see that green stuff, clean everything off, get a good new connection, try it again. 99% of the time, that's going to take care of your problem if you've got that green corrosion there. Could be the controller's not supplying voltage to that terminal. It's rare, but it can happen. Those of you that know how to use your multimeters, you're looking for 24 to 30 volts AC between your terminal and your common. If it's at 0, yeah, hopefully you've got some unused stations on that controller and you can just move it over so you don't have to replace the controller. Could be the wiring between the controller and the valve is damaged. Somebody's been digging in your yard, which is unfortunate. If somebody's digging in your yard and they cut into one of your irrigation lines, how do you know where to make the repair? The big wet muddy hole. Somebody cuts into your wires between your valve and your timer. Come here, you. How do you find 24 volts bleeding into the ground?
You don't.
It can be done. Good trained irrigators can use what's called a ground fault locator, and they can find a cut wire to within a 3-inch square. Which is a whole lot better than what most of them do, where they'll just start putting battery-operated controllers inside the valve boxes everywhere, which never get changed on their programs. Or it could be the solenoid is bad. So the solenoid itself can be bad. This is just an electromagnet that lifts and then drops that plunger inside there. That's all that's going on, and this can go bad. And again, those of you that knows how to use your multimeters, if I cut the wires off here and I have my 2 wires here, I'm going to test in between 20 and 60 ohms is good. Below 20 is a short, above 60 is open. And actually when they go open, they usually go to infinity when you test them. If the valve won't close, programming error. This happens, learn the syntax of how to program your timer. Had a resident in Gilbert, his water bill skyrocketed and his lawn was underwater. I opened up his timer and said, well, there's your problem. He said, what, I'm watering my sprinklers for 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Because it said 3:12. I said, no, you're running your sprinklers for 3 hours and 12 minutes. Always check the easy stuff first before you start digging things up. Could be the controller is constantly supplying voltage to a terminal. Also very rare, but turn your timer to the off position. Am I still getting that 24 to 30 volts AC? So now if I've got a bad wire connection and it's only affecting valve number 1, which wire connection is it? That one right there. If it's affecting all of them, which connection is it? It's the common. Those of you that do house wiring, that's a neutral. We got to be different. We call it a common. So I'm going to take this valve apart so you can see how easy these are to deal with. Before I do this, I'm going to find my flow control knob. There it is. I'm going to use this valve because it's got the different colors so it's easier to see what's going on. Your modern valves have a way to turn that solenoid a half a turn or a quarter turn to manually open up the valve. That's called an internal bleed. It is literally lifting that plunger off that little port underneath there. Some of your older valves where you can't do that, you'll have what's called an external bleed screw. So I open that up about a turn and I've got water spitting out. That is a bleed, it's bleeding the water outside of the valve rather than into the downstream piping. So those of you that have the valves where you can manually bleed them with the solenoid, that spring-loaded plunger is captured in there so it won't fall out when you take it out. If your valve does not have that feature, be ready to catch that plunger. So now inside there, I'm going to take apart my screws. This large knob in the middle, if you have one, is a flow control knob, so I can turn it down. So if I don't want the valve to open all the way, or I want to control how far that diaphragm lifts, I can. But inside your valve, you will have a small spring. Don't worry, it's not going to shoot out and hurt you. Don't stretch it out. And a diaphragm. That's all that's inside your valve. So now we'll talk about things that could be hydraulic problems. If the valve won't open. So if I came over here to my controller and I tried turning on a station, which I can't do because I couldn't reach an outlet for my controller. If I tried turning on these stations, they wouldn't come on. So it's like, something's wrong. So let's see, is it manual, is it hydraulic or electrical? So I would come out and try and manually bleed on the valves by turning those solenoids. And in this case, they still would not open. Does anyone see why on my display board, why those valves are not running? Somebody shut the water off. Maybe you had a leak and your neighbor noticed it and says, oh my gosh, I know they don't want to waste that water. I'm going to turn their water off. Usually they'll turn it off here, but then they forgot to tell you about it. Look for the easy things first before you start digging up your valve box. Could be dirt or debris in the valve. Could be some dirt or debris inside that little port underneath that solenoid. If the valve won't close, dirt or debris in the valve, or a hole or tear in the diaphragm. That's all there is to it. You need more help? We've got the, don't forget the irrigation supply stores. I have nothing against the home improvement stores. I buy irrigation products there. But being in the industry for 35 years, I know what not to buy and what I should buy. Now some of those guys, they actually have a pretty good handle on irrigation. Sometimes when I'm in that store and I hear the advice being given out, I think to myself, I bet he's really good at fixing toilets. The people who work at the irrigation supply stores have years of experience in the field working on irrigation. It is the lifelong dream of all landscapers in Arizona to get a job in the air conditioning. That's how some of them do it. So your main ones are Ewing, Horizon, Site One, and Sprinkle World. Now, I don't know if you guys have any out here in Gold Canyon. Probably not, but they do have branches in Queen Creek, Mesa. I'm not sure about Apache Junction. Your irrigation manufacturers' tech support lines and websites, this is all in the handout. Rainbird's very easy to find on the website, rainbird.com. Hunter.com is a financial services company, so they had to use hunterindustries.com. But your search engine of choice, Hunter and irrigation, you'll get to hunterindustries.com. Toro's very easy. Irritrol is irritrolsystems.com. It used to be Hardy. Same company, they just changed the name. So if you've got an old valve or an old timer that says Hardy, you go to irritrolsystems.com. You can find out information. Are my emitters pressure compensating? I can download the manual for my controller. How many people have the manual for your timer? How many have read it? How many understood it? A couple of you. See, the manufacturers write their own manuals and they're experts. So I understand everything in those manuals. What they really need to do is get people like you and teach you how the controllers work and how they think, and have you write a manual in plain language. Then everyone would understand them. Okay, with that being said, let's switch over to the watering presentation. Did not have a lot of room here. There we go. So again, this presentation was given to me by one of the authors of the Landscape Watering by the Numbers brochure, Donna DeFrancesco from the city of Mesa. She's kind enough to let us use her presentation. It's great because it follows all the same things you'll see in the brochure itself, and I didn't have to make a new presentation. So this is kind of the meat of it. So again, like Ethan said, you can request these from their website, or you can just visit one of the libraries like in Mesa or Gilbert. We all stock them at the libraries. Okay, factors that affect our irrigation needs. Climate. Yeah, what's our climate like here in Arizona? Hot? Is it now? No, so you got to think about the season. You got to think about your wind, your temperature, your humidity, your solar radiation, all sorts of things like that. That's how we measure plant water needs. We measure it in what's called evapotranspiration, the amount of water that evaporates out of the soil, and all the water that the plant material brings up, creates food by the photosynthetic process, so sugars are transported back down to the roots, but the majority of the water leaves through openings, pores on the undersides of the leaves and on the blades of your grass called stomates, that open and close in relation to what's happening with the weather. So on a June afternoon at 119 degrees and 7% humidity and a 10-mile-an-hour wind, full sun, those pores are wide open and those plants are pushing water. But now all of a sudden this time of year, they're hardly ever opening at all. Think about your soil type. Like I said, the recommendations I give are if you have a clay to clay loam soil like we do have in Gilbert and Mesa. Yours might be a little bit more coarse, so that means you might have to water a little bit more often than our recommendations. Your plant type. Don't water an agave like a hibiscus or vice versa. You're going to lose. Plant size. Now that you know about those stomates, think about it. We'll have people put in brand new irrigation systems and their water bill goes through the roof and they're like, oh, well, they're new plants. They need more water. Who needs more water, that brand new baby plant or the mature plant? The bigger plant needs more water. You water them differently. This one with the tiny root zone has to be watered short run times frequently, but very quickly stretch it out to grow those roots. Think about your microclimate or exposure. Hard to think of this time of year, but think to a nice June afternoon. Put on the thinnest t-shirt you have at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, go to the west side of your house and lean up against that wall. Can't do it for very long, but now walk over to the other side of the house and lean up against that wall. You experience a 30-degree temperature difference between those two spots on your house. And if you do want to have a couple high water use plants that need to be watered much more often than your desert plants, that's a way to try and balance it out so you're not putting in a whole new drip irrigation zone just for those couple of high water use plants. Use those microclimates to your advantage. So now those high water use plants in summer can go more than 5 to 7 days between watering at maturity. They might be able to go 9 to 10, which is a good place to start with your desert-adapted shrubs. And maintenance. Those of you that shear your shrubs into those goofy shapes, I don't get it, but what do the leaves do for the plant? What is its number one job? Making food. You remove 30% of its food-making capability. How does the plant respond? Goes into an accelerated growth mode trying to get its food-making capabilities back, which causes an increase in water requirements and also causes us to increase what? Shearing. I don't get it. Anytime I'm in a nursery and I see somebody pick one plant over another, it's almost always because of the flowers. They bring them home, they're cute, they got flowers, and they get to that magical size, and then they get sheared, and you never see a flower on that plant again. For your shrubs, this should be your number one pruning device. Natural pruning does not mean no pruning. It doesn't mean have a jungle. It just means don't be shearing off all those leaves and taking away your flowers. So when it comes to your watering your landscape, your typical questions are how? What are you watering with? Sprinklers, bubblers, drip, garden hose? When? Time of day. When's the best time of day to water your landscape? Early morning. Yep, get that water in the soil before the heat of day comes up with sprinklers in the middle of the night because there's less wind and you're throwing the water up in the air. You're not losing as much to evaporation. Where? It depends. Lawns, everywhere you want the grass to grow as evenly as possible. And with shrubs and trees, where are you watering? Drip line, where the water absorbing roots are. And then how much and how often, and that's the great thing this brochure does, because it gets you to look at your plants, the size of your plants, and then your irrigation system, how fast is it putting down the water. So 3 simple parts they broke it into: how much water your plants need, how much water your irrigation system applies, and put those 2 things together. So how much water your plants need? You do want to water to a different depth. So like your small perennials, only about 1 foot deep, your medium to large shrubs 2 feet deep, and your trees 3 feet deep. And your grass you want to water about 6 to 10 inches deep. So how do you know how deep the water's going after you water? Does anyone here have Superman's vision? There's 2 ways to do it. Run your irrigation like you normally would. You think you're watering deep enough. Wait for a few hours for everything to percolate down, and then go start digging until you hit dry soil. That's the hard way. The easy way is to understand our soil. When it's dry, it's a consistency of what? Cement. What do we do before we dig? We get it wet. Now it's very pliable. So what you want to use... Oh crap, Art. There it is. This is the best tool you can have as an irrigator. This is a soil probe. It will slide easily through the moist soil and stop when it hits the depth of the watering. So you can get any metal rod and just kind of bend it over, or you can get a nice fancy one. Is anyone here familiar with the Master Gardener organization? Yeah, you can buy them. Their members, one of their members makes these. I think they're, last I heard, were 20 bucks a pop. So you get them nice, and he's actually got a little notch here at 1, 2, and 3 feet. So he's got them painted in. So you can put this in, and if it's dry, it's like this. You can't put it in. If it's moist, it'll slide easily. Now remember, this is a pointy metal rod, and again, don't make that too sharp. If he's ground that way too sharp, smack that with a hammer. There are things underground you do not want to put a metal rod into, like that big wire bringing electricity up to your electric meter. You pierce the insulation on that, game over. Irrigation doesn't matter anymore. You don't stop getting electrocuted until that big green box at the end of the street pops its fuse. Move over another couple inches and try it again, because you might just be on a rock. Soil probes do not lie. We've done this with our checkups. We actually go through the meter and say, I'm seeing how many gallons per minute that sprinkler station is using. And based on your program in here, you're putting 60,000 gallons of water a month on that grass. No way. I will sink a 3-foot soil probe with one hand all the way to the handle. And then I'll have him walk over to where his granite is, where there's no emitters. It won't go into the ground at all. Soil probes do not lie. Okay. Again, water at the drip line. And as the plants get bigger, more emitters. Add those emitters in. Okay, sprinklers. You are throwing the water up in the air so you can catch it and measure it. What we call the catch can test. Very simply, tuna fish cans, cat food cans, straight side, flat bottom, all the same size opening. Don't use a coffee cup and a dish pan. You'll get really bad results that way. Now Donna, it's really funny, she put them in this nice perfect grid. If you knew Donna, you'd know that's why that's so funny. Scatter them randomly through the yard because you will get different amounts of water in each of the cans. That's your uniformity. The closer you can get them to all the same amount, the better off you are. You're not overwatering to get this area enough water. Now this area is getting overwatered. And you're just going to measure the water in each of the cans, and you're going to add them together and then divide it by the number of cans to get the average depth. And once you do that, there's a table in the book that'll tell you based on your average depth exactly how many minutes to run your sprinklers, not my sprinklers. So what they're doing here is they're getting you to apply 3/4 of an inch of water to your lawn each time you water. And I love it because the landscape contractors, when I show them that book, they're like, that's not really how you do it. That's just what they wrote for the homeowners. That's not real science. Really? How long have you been a certified landscape irrigation auditor? Let's walk through the math. Donna and Robin were so clever at hiding the math behind the scenes on this. A clay loam soil, if I want to water 8 inches deep at full water holding capacity, that is 1.44 inches. So we hold 0.18 inches of water per inch of soil in a clay loam soil. I want to water 8 inches down, so that's 0.18 times 8, that's 1.44 inches. How much water do I want to let the lawn use up before I rewater? Half of it. What's half of 1.44 inches?
275, good enough.
So here, if it was 0.4, we would actually water 28 minutes. But what if we said, actually, it's 0.45? Some people are better at math than others. So then we would water between 22 and 28 minutes, which is 25 minutes. 3 minutes? Oh, big deal. How much water did that save? Make the math easy. Let's say your sprinklers are using 10 gallons a minute. I trim 3 minutes of runtime off. How much water did I save? 10 times 3, 30 gallons. A couple showers, that's not a big deal. How many times a year do you water that lawn? 30 gallons every single time. That's how you get multiple thousand gallons of savings, just by fine-tuning your irrigation scheduling. Okay. Does anyone here use bubblers, where you're filling up the well and letting it soak in? This is what we commonly used before we started using drip irrigation. I didn't think anyone out here used bubblers. There's still good reasons to use bubblers, but we'll skip past those. Once again, here's our emitters. So that's 1 gallon per hour. And actually, if you look at that little emitter, it actually is imprinted on there. It says 1 GPH. Fortunately for me, I carry a magnifying glass everywhere I go. Yep, 1 GPH. This is in a brand new emitter, never been installed. After it's been in the yard for a month, you can't read that anymore. That's why they do color code them. And again, this one says 8. Is that 8 gallons per hour?
Who knows?
It's 8 liters. Not made in America. And again, this is not a pressure compensating emitter, so that's 8 liters per hour at exactly 15 psi and only at 15 psi. So when you look at, you can also estimate by flow rate, and this nice little chart is in the brochure. So again, 1 gallon per hour, constant but individual drips. Drip, 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 drip. That's why we tell you, oh my gosh, you might need to run your drip system for 3 hours. 3 hours? Thought you wanted to save water. Well, if I've got a 2 gallon per hour emitter and I run it for 3 hours, how much water have I given the plant? 6 gallons. If I run those flag emitters for 3 hours, what have I done? Made a giant mess and wasted water. So what we're going to do with your shrubs is you're going to look at the plant canopy diameter. So all they're doing here is trying to figure out how wide the plant is, how deep am I watering, what's that water holding capacity in gallons, and what's half that water. So if I've got a 2-foot wide shrub, I want to give it 4 gallons of water each time I water it. If I've got a 2-foot tree, or a 4-foot tree, I give it 16 gallons rather than the 12 gallons on a shrub, because it should be watering your trees deeper than your shrubs. What drives how deep the water goes into your soil when you run your irrigation? Runtime. So that's why we're going to talk about how you change your watering schedule. Now, one thing is when you get out to that 20-foot tree, that says 235 gallons. Oh my gosh. Now think about your true desert trees out there. If you're using these mesquites, these ironwoods, these palo verdes, even some of your non-natives, some of those acacias and things like that. Are you watering 100% of that root zone 3 feet deep? Not even close with your drip irrigation. And that's actually not what the number would be. That'd actually be closer to about 650 gallons. They've actually trimmed back that percentage a little bit. But honestly, with desert adapted trees, once you get them that well established and you've grown those roots out there, you're probably going to stop at about 40 to 50 gallons each time you water it. However, you're watering those trees, those desert adapted trees, just to keep them looking a little bit nicer than the middle of June on those foothills palo verdes out there, which drop their leaves when it's that hot, because they're not photosynthesizing anyway. You don't want your trees in your yard that are shading your house to drop their leaves. So you're going to give them that supplemental water. As opposed to, what do we like to grow here that's very high water use? Citrus trees. You're watering for a whole different reason now. You give that 20-foot citrus tree 235 gallons when you water it. How many emitters does that take? Lots of emitters. Fortunately, if you're going to continue to do it with drip, you can buy drip tubing with pre-installed pressure compensating emitters. So you can just put that in a nice loop around the drip line of the tree, and then you can end up with a 2 gallon per hour emitter every 12, 14, or 18, or 24 inches. Different manufacturers make them. You're only going to get that at the irrigation supply stores. That's where bubblers come in handy because they work in gallons per minute. So I've got 4 gallon per hour bubblers in that tree well. I'm delivering 16 gallons of water per minute. I can deliver that 200 and some gallons of water pretty quickly.
Is your tree well that big then? To get the,
My tree well is that big. So again, what most people do with bubblers is they'll do this nice little 3-foot wide well around the tree when it's planted, which is good because that's where I want to water, but they never extend the tree well, and actually you don't want to. What you want to do is when the tree gets bigger, you want to construct a secondary well outside. So imagine the shape of a donut. So you move your bubblers to the outside ring. So now I'm watering the donut and not the hole. With drip emitters, just like I said, get that pre-installed pressure compensating line and put it in a loop around the tree. Yes?
Do you recommend that for desert adapted plants as well, or just high?
If you're using bubblers, yes, because what's going on with the bubblers is you're applying the water so fast, it'll just run across the surface. So you build these berms around it, sometimes with hardscape because you've got money and you want to make it look pretty, so brick or flagstone. So you're literally filling this up. It's like flood irrigation. If you ever go down to Schnepp Farms where they still flood irrigate those fields, they fill them up and let them soak in. That's how bubbler irrigation works. Yes?
if you put that external ring thing you were talking about with the emitters, do you then have to bury that?
I would put it under the granite, but not in the soil.
Okay.
Okay. So you're going to match up that bubbler output to gallons needed to determine your runtime, and they do have this runtime worksheet in there, so you can do the math, and they give you an example. So we'll go through an example here real quick. Let's say on valve number 1, our shrubs are about 2 feet, and each one has one 1 gallon per hour emitter, and again, shrubs are about 2 feet. Don't go out there with the tape measure measuring your plants. This is science, but it's not rocket science. We're not trying to land that satellite on that asteroid 350 million miles away and then bring it home. Yeah, they're about 2 feet. Now, when I run this zone, each shrub has one 1 gallon per hour emitter on it, so when I run it, each shrub is getting how many gallons per hour? 1. 1 times 1 is 1. How much water do I want to give a 2 foot wide shrub? 2 foot, down to here. That's a 4-hour run time. They were really, really good about making this math as simple as possible. Now what happens sometimes, and we'll see this a little bit later, I'll bring it up in a moment when we get through the next couple zones. Now let's say that's 4 hours. Now in the next zone, our trees are about 8 feet wide, and each one of them has 3 2 gallon per hour emitters on it. So when we run that zone, each tree is getting how many gallons per hour? 6. And how many gallons of water do we want to give an 8 foot wide tree when we water it? 38. So 38 divided by 6 is what?
About 6.5.
6 hours, 17 minutes, and 21 seconds. 6 hours. Close enough. And then our last zone, notice I didn't tell you whether that tree was a desert tree or a high water use tree like a citrus, did I? They're both the same size tree. We're watering the same size root system. The amount of water we deliver is the same. What changes between the two of them is the citrus needs to be watered more often than our desert trees. So on here we've got 4-foot wide citrus trees, and each one has one 2-gallon per minute bubbler on it. So each tree is getting 2 gallons per minute. And how much water do we want to give a 4-foot wide tree?
16.
4-foot tree, 16 gallons of water. So what's our run time?
8 hours.
Bubblers, gallons per minute. Your sprinklers and bubblers are gallons per minute, so your run time is in minutes. Drip irrigation, the delivery is gallons per hour, so you're programming in hourly increments. You had your hand up, ma'am?
Yeah, I'm looking at your 8-foot tree and going, okay, he's only got 3 emitters. I mean, 3 emitters doing if you've got an 8-foot tree.
But each one is now 2 gallon.
I'm just wondering how you figure out how many emitters you should ideally have.
There is a table in this brochure that'll say based on what it is and how wide it is, how many emitters and how many gallons per hour they should be.
Thank you, okay. We need that book.
Okay, so that is simply how you get to the right runtime for your plants. Our trees and shrubs on the same valve. They actually give it to you in the example on zone or valve number 1. I've got 8-foot trees, 3-foot shrubs, 2-foot succulents. I wanted 6 hours for the trees, 4 hours for the shrubs, and 2 hours for the succulents. Are you going to dig it up and now zone it out properly with extra valves and run new pipe all through the yard?
Change the emitter.
Change the emitter.
Change your emitters. Instead of 3 emitters, we added 2 more emitters around the tree, dropped it to about 4 hours. On our shrubs, instead of 1 gallon per hour emitters, we dropped them to 0.5 gallon per hour emitters, so we went from 2 hours to 4 hours. You've still got a problem with frequency. You're going to have to water for the thirstiest plant on that zone, whatever it is, so something's going to be overwatered, but that'll control the overwatering so you're not doing it as badly, and everything's going to be a lot happier. Okay, now you have your run times. Now it's how frequently you should water. So this table is in the brochure, and also, do you guys do the yellow cards?
We have some.
Okay. Well, then ask quick before everyone else takes up their supply. This is handy to keep on your refrigerator or in your timer. So it breaks it out. Trees, desert adapted, high water use. Shrubs, desert adapted, high water use. Ground covers and vines, cacti, succulents, so on and so forth. And it breaks it up into 4 seasons about how often you should water. So you'll see in the summertime, your desert adapted shrubs should be watered every 7 to 21 days. Your high water use shrubs every 5 to 7 days. On your trees, your desert adapted every 7 to 21, every 7 to 10 for your high water use trees. So that's why you want your citrus tree on its own separate zone, ideally. So you're going to water that more often than your desert trees. Now this does consider maturity and season. So this is actually our ET curve. June is our peak ET month. So look at how much water, if you're a winter visitor and you leave in March, you have to set to water at that level. You've got that much overwatering going on, and before you get back in October, you've got that much overwatering going on. That's where those smart timers can really be a helpful tool for you guys. Or if you're just scared of that box and you don't want to go out there and reset it all the time, you get one that does it for you once it's programmed correctly. You guys don't do rebates, do you? Not yet. Yeah, sounds like there could be something here. This is actually a graph I made of my weather station at my house. This is the entire year of 2014. The green lines are the hourly temperature for the entire year. So here we are in June, highest temperature, highest high temperature, highest low temperature. The yellow line is the hourly humidity. So in June, lowest humidity, highest temperatures. That's what drives that high water use. Now these big spikes on the yellow lines, what do you think happened then? That's rainfall. Humidity goes way up. Nice wet winter that year. Okay. So they do have the quarterly frequencies for watering grass, but because grass is a higher water use plant, there is a table for you on how often you should water your grass. So in June and July with that 3/4 of an inch, once every 3 days, not 5 days a week. If you're watering 5 days a week, you're overwatering. So Also notice that what you're doing is you're changing how often you water. What a lot of people do is they set it up for their nice big run time, and then as it gets cooler, they start shortening their run time. What drives how deep the water goes into the soil when you run your irrigation? Run time. So I set it up, and then as it gets cooler and cooler, I start cutting my run time. Did your roots shrink? No, it's only guys at the beach that worry about shrinkage. The plants are using the water less quickly. So you change how often you water, not how long you water. So that's why you're changing here. And if you don't do your winter grass in December and January, once a month if it doesn't rain. If you do put in winter grass, once you get it established in December and January, once every 14 days, not 5 days a week. You spot those landscapers that are on mow crews in the wintertime, you see them in grocery stores and restaurants, they're green from their elbow down. Because they take that high water content ryegrass, they overwater it, and it turns into soup when they cut it, and it keeps clogging up their mower decks. So they have to keep scooping that out, and they're dyed green with chlorophyll all winter long. If they changed how they watered, they'd make their customers happy with lower water bills. They'd make themselves happier because they wouldn't have to keep stopping and scraping out the goop and taking more time to mow the grass. Okay. I do want to go back to this card right now because I want to point something out here. You'll notice for our desert shrubs in summertime, we say once every 7 to 21 days. Is it 7 or 21?
Depends how
Yes.
it is.
I don't know what soil your plant is in. I don't know what exposure it's in. And we call a lot of plants desert adapted, but it is a sliding scale. Some are thirstier than others. The other thing is we're calling summer May through October. You remember that ET chart, how different October was from June? I work 4:10 schedule in Gilbert, so I'm up at 4:30 in the morning. In June, throw on my shorts, get a cup of coffee, go in the backyard with the dog. No problem. It is 84 to 88 degrees at 4:30 in the morning. That's why it's also important, because in October, oh my gosh, it's still 100 degrees. Now at 4:30 in the morning in the middle of October, I go out in the backyard with just my shorts. It's cold. That concrete patio is cold. I got to get my girlfriend's slippers. It's not just the high temperature driving, it's the low temperature. So actually changing it more often than this is actually better. And let's see if I can find the number on my phone here real quick where you can get a text every single month from the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. It used to be one of those 5-digit numbers, but for some reason they had to change it to an 800 number. Let's find them here. Rats. Might have deleted it. If you go to the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association, that's amwua.org. Yeah, it looks like I'm deleting my monthly reminders. They will have that phone number for you. It's like an 855 number, but every month you'll get a text on your phone with a link that'll take you right to it, and it'll say, for this month, if you've got desert adapted trees, water every this many days. If you've got high water use trees, every this many days. Same thing they're doing on here, but in a monthly basis instead of a quarterly basis.
What's that website again?
amwua.org. It's all the municipal water user providers in the valley. Well, not all of them, but most of them. So we work on legislative issues, policy issues, water resources issues, and of course, conservation. There we go. So simple as 1, 2, 3, how much water your plants need, how much water your system applies, not mine. Put the two together. And that is it. Ended up a little bit early, so do we have some questions? Yes?
On your poly pipe, how deep should that be?
Should be 6 to 8 inches deep. So a lot of times I'll hear from people are getting those lengthwise splits on it. You patch in a new piece, and it keeps happening again and again and again. In the times I've been able to go look at the system happening, a lot of times that poly tubing is only this deep. And there's a huge difference in the soil temperature between here and here. So this tubing is just desiccating faster.
I have the phone number.
Oh, perfect.
She's got the phone number. She found it. Thank you.
Are you guys ready to write it? So it's 1844, thank you. 1844-416-1428. And you text when to water, TO.
All one
caps.
word,
Yeah.
when to water.
Repeat the number.
It's 1844-416-1428.
Thank you, Emily.
Now, you'll notice for the wintertime, we are saying to water your desert plants like maybe once every 30 days or something. So if you have been one of those people that have been watering short, shallow, frequent irrigation, number one, this is a perfect time to make those changes to get those plants used to it, because it's not 119 degrees, where you won't stress everything and stroke everything out within 3 days. The other thing is if you start working it out now, you're going to take it out gradually and make sure your plants have actually grown the roots to the point where they're going to utilize that larger delivery of water, and they're going to get used to having that time in between waterings. So this is a perfect time to make those changes. Any more questions?
Yes, on the sprinkler system, getting pulsation throughout the lines.
Okay.
Thump, 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 thump.
Okay. That sounds a bit like water hammer. What it could be is you may have some sort of a partial obstruction inside your valve and your diaphragm is oil canning on you. There could be another thing. Do you know what brand and model timer you have?
It's a Rainbird, it's actually the one you had on your display.
That's an Irrigation rain dial.
Okay.
What I want you to do is on the back panel, back of that panel, that's where that 9-volt battery goes.
Changed it.
And it's still doing that thumping? Okay. Because some of them will develop a bad solder joint on that circuit board, and those batteries don't run the irrigation with no power, but for some reason on that timer, if you've got it where it's got that bad solder joint, putting in that battery gives that extra oomph, and all of a sudden it takes care of that bad solder joint. I've also had them where it only happens in the morning and not the afternoon. Their timer's on the west side of their house, so in the afternoon it heats up and that solder joint closes itself up again.
Because I can do it manually, it doesn't do that. When it comes on automatically, that's when it phones.
Even with a brand new battery.
Brand new battery, yep.
Okay.
Even bought new batteries to make sure it's good batteries.
Okay. So again, what you may want to do, it's very strange that it's not doing it when you're turning it on manually.
Yeah, manually it's fine, and then, of course, then when it starts running, you're
That still could be an issue in the circuit board somehow. If you can get a loaner panel from somebody, swap in a new panel, and see if that takes care of the problem.
okay. Second, should replace that item.
I wouldn't replace the whole valve. I would just go ahead, flush it, and maybe pop in a new diaphragm.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
For any other questions, just let me pass this little baton. This is just for the recording, so everyone can hear you.
Well, I got a second here. Get a drink of water. I am so thankful my voice held out. I wasn't sure about that.
It's been a
All
great
right.
presentation, thank you so much.
Yeah, let's give a round of applause.
I hope you found it helpful. Remember, in 2 hours, we can't teach you everything about irrigation I've learned in the last 35 years. Remember those irrigation supply stores? A lot of those guys have years of experience and can be very, very helpful. Their main customers are the contractors. So if they've got a whole wall of contractors in there picking up orders, be patient, let them clear those guys out. Then they're going to be much more patient with you as far as answering your questions.
How about Home Depot and Lowe's?
I buy some stuff there, and sometimes those guys have a pretty good idea about what's going on. Sometimes I'm not so sure they know much about irrigation at all.
But do they normally have these supplies?
Not everything. Some of these things you're only going to find at the professional irrigation supply stores. Yes.
I have a question for you. Are you available for residential audits, irrigation audits?
No, I have a full-time job with the town of Gilbert.
That is too bad. Okay, thank you.
Now, as far as finding good quality irrigation technicians out there, they do exist. There is training out there. And you want to find the people that have spent the time and the money to go get the training. So there's training available through a program that AMWA and the University of Arizona collaborates on called Smartscape. So you can go to their website, smartscape.org. It is up to those contractors who go through the training to put in their information. So first you're going to see a whole big list of people. But then if you're gonna say East Valley Irrigation, you're only gonna get a few. Now, what we say with those people is we have trained them how to do it properly, and that's all we can say. That doesn't mean they will, but we have trained them how to do it. There's also training available through the Arizona Landscape Contractors Association, or ALCA for short. So they have the Arizona Certified Landscape Professional Program. They've got the Certified Irrigation Technician Program. They've got the Sustainable Landscape Management Program. So you can double check those guys and see if they're on their list, if they've actually gotten those certifications. So that way you're going to find somebody that has much more interest in this being an actual career rather than just something for beer money.
Can you repeat the second organization, please?
Arizona Landscape Contractors Association.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
What's the name of the booklet that you keep holding up so we can?
It is Landscape Watering by the Numbers.
And if you go to our website online, to our conservation tab, you'll be able to request this literature alongside 3 other books we offer from AMWA as well. You'll just submit an easy application, and then I'll mail it to your address.
What's your website?
It's azwater.com.
Okay.
There's a conservation tab.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
What about pruning? You talked about irrigation, and then you talked about pruning, you know, in the fall and things, and not
Yes.
doing that. How much does pruning affect the irrigation and water loss and things like that?
Like I said, the plant's going to go into an accelerated growth mode, trying to grow back its food-making capability, which increases its water use. And that's something, excuse me, the horticulturists and the plant pathologists and all those people who actually know about plants were telling us for years. Finally, Dr. Martin in the early 2000s from ASU did a study and proved the people who understand plants knew what they were talking about. If you're going to constantly shear your plants like that, you have to give them water more often and probably more water. So your pruning shears are your best option. Nice natural landscape. And that's the other thing is when it comes to design is right plant, right place. You know, you got that little 2-foot wide planting area alongside your wall coming up to your front door. Don't plant an oleander there and then get mad at the plant. You're the one who put it there. Find the right plant that'll grow in that area where you don't have to contain its growth like that. You're just kind of controlling its form and shape. How many people here have bougainvillea in their yard? How many people like trimming bougainvillea? Stop watering it so much. The people who were at my house before me put in a bougainvillea 1 foot in from the driveway, 1 foot in from the sidewalk. How big do bougainvillea get?
Bigger than that.
Bigger than that. I have to prune them about 3-4 times a year because I water them very infrequently. They're 20-year-old plants. Actually, 2 of my bougainvilleas are on 0 irrigation whatsoever. They're too far away from anything I water to be picking it up, and the only thing that happens to them is they grow slower. But every now and again, I get that one couple of wild branches coming out over the sidewalk, and I go out there and I go snip, snip, and I'm done. Not causing this giant mess with these head shears. You know, these landscapers that show up to the HOAs, you got the 2 guys jump out with the head shears, and they go down the whole road making a giant mess, and then they got 10 guys behind them cleaning up the mess they just made. If they spent more time on the irrigation and less time causing that mess, they'd be saving an awful lot of water because there's a lot of invisible drip leaks out there that people just aren't seeing. They'll trim the run times down so you don't see the drip leaks. That's why older communities, you start seeing less and less plants. Yes, sir.
You mentioned about shrubs being cut back. What about if you do some, like, a good amount of tree trimming back? Does that affect the usage as much?
It's going to affect the usage, but when it comes to trees, if you're going to prune your own trees, learn how to do it correctly. Other cities do offer classes on pruning, or you can check with the master gardeners. They've got wonderful, University of Arizona, they've got wonderful literature on it from the Cooperative Extension Office. If you're going to have somebody work on your trees, nobody but a certified arborist touches your trees. Because somebody can shear shrubs into balls and then you realize, boy, I'd really like to see the flowers. Most of your plants can handle what we call a reduction pruning by cutting it back super hard like this far off the ground, and it'll come back in its natural form. Somebody comes in and messes up your tree and does something like tops them, you don't have a tree anymore, ever. It is no longer a tree from that point on. So the other thing that's going to go on is you get those new branches coming off those stubs they left up there. They do not connect back to the heartwood of that branch. They've got a very weak surface attachment. So as they grow and become heavier, what's going to happen?
Break off.
They're going to break off and fall. You've got liability issues, not to mention the damage you've done to the tree. So the International Society of Arboriculture, you can find out if somebody is actually a certified arborist or not. So I actually ran into that with the guy at the Mesa Utilities building when I worked there. So we're walking along, and he keeps talking about these acacias, and I kept correcting him and saying ironwood. Then finally he looked at me and said, yeah, ironwood acacia. There's no such tree. I thought you said you're an arborist. Oh, well, I was certified in Nebraska. It's the International Society of Arboriculture, so if you were certified in Kuwait, I'm going to find you on that list. Will I find you on that list? No. Due diligence. People will know the lingo and they'll tell you they're a certified arborist. Check.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, go for it.
All right, so we have 3 plants, and someone donated a plant.
That was Tom McDonald, donated a plant. I don't know if you know Tom, but he runs or owns Family Dog Landscape.
And raffle these off too.
Oh, I can raffle them off, all
So
right.
I was recommended if you have any questions.
I know you guys actually wanted this.
Thank you very much. He lives off of Cloud. He's willing to.
Yeah.
We can go up and visit his house and he'll show you around. If you like.
Yeah, so thank you, Tom, for that. I saw him leave a little bit midway through, so.
I just found those in the garage.
But we're gonna do a little raffle for the 3 plants you see. Jeff, would you like to do the polling for the raffle? All right, so we'll do the one on the far left. That is a bottle brush. It is not flowering, but they get very beautiful. So I love
Is that a
those.
full size or a little John's?
think
Looks
it's-
like a full size.
Which, how big?
Yeah, Callistemon citrinus.
All right.
Would they get?
And if you don't want the plant, just say so and we'll raffle it off to someone else. So we have Mike Papazian. Papazian? Isn't that right? Would you like that plant?
That one's probably, if you let it go, it can easily get about 6 feet by 6 feet. You can contain it to that size.
6 to 8 feet, it's a dwarf.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It is exactly that.
All right. Nice. So we'll raffle off that middle one. I actually don't know that plant. Do you know that one, Jeff? It's like a agave of sorts. Yeah, I don't know which agave that one is.
If Kent Newland were here, he'd know exactly what agave is and what its scientific name is.
Well, it is a nice
It is
agave.
an agave, so it is true desert native, true Sonoran or Chihuahua native. And here we've got David Coward.
Oh, you're holding it. Perfect. Hey. All right.
Well, that was easy.
All right.
Actually, go ahead.
We'll do one more. All
Okay.
right. Carol
Hegan?
Heason.
There you
Perfect.
go.
All right.
No, just where to put this too.
Oh, perfect. All right, and then we have that last plant. I forget the name of that plant, but it's flowering. It has pretty little purple flowers on it.
It's a lavender blue emu.
Oh, it's one of the emu bushes.
I love those.
Australian native, so it does tolerate the heat really well. But
It says hardiness, 17 Fahrenheit.
yep,
So, yeah.
good one for here. You don't have to worry so much about covering it in those cold winters, unless we have a super cold winter again like we had in, I believe it was 2006 or 7. I'm gonna let you do that one.
All right. I apologize if I'm butchering this, but Dulcinea? Dulcinea. Perfect. And then let's gauge the interest in this last landscape watering by the numbers. Anyone willing, oh, I got two. We want rock, paper, scissors for it?
Rochambeau.
We'll order, if
Order.
we can order a box, actually, that would be great, that we could actually leave here.
We can see if we can get
That
some.
would be lovely.
Yeah, it's hard to get these books right now. Yeah.
I don't know when our next.
So perfect, I'm gonna
reprint of
hand
that
this
is.
off to you.
I don't know, we've been talking to Jacob about it.
There you go, sir.
Tina handles that, so I have no idea where we're at on that.
Yeah.
All right, and then just last order of business, we do have a post survey. So if you guys could fill that out and then drop it off at the table for us. Any and all feedback is really important for us so we can continue to give you quality workshops like this. Another thing is we have, if I did not get the chance to speak with you as you were coming in, there's too many people, so I didn't get to talk to everyone. But we have the water conservation kits. For eligible customers, you just need to be a single-family resident or have an individual meter if you live in like a townhome or an apartment. Also be an Arizona Water Company customer. But if you are interested in a water conservation kit, they have some EPA WaterSense shower heads. Nothing too fancy, so if you have like really fancy shower heads at home, you might not want it. But we have EPA WaterSense faucet aerators that you just screw onto your bathroom sinks. We have a toilet flapper, a universal toilet flapper, the biggest cause of leaks indoors, so that might be handy for most of you. We have some outdoor like drip irrigation emitters, drip punch tools, just a little bit of everything. But if you're interested in that, please meet me at the table and I can start distributing those kits out to you.
Which meters are you using?
Rainbird.
Okay.
Say again?